You are watching the National News Desk, America's News Now.
Three weeks until Election Day, both campaigns looking to one particular podcast to put them over the top, while early voters are already setting records in one key swing state.
Our hope is that Israel will make the changes that we have outlined.
The U.S. raises the pressure on Israel to get more humanitarian assistance into Gaza. What the latest numbers on aid show and what it could suggest about billions of dollars in U.S. military aid sent to the country. Then dealing with debt while you are preparing for upcoming holidays. What financial experts have to say about saving money while enjoying the season. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. We are exactly 3 weeks away from Election Day, and the presidential candidates are trying to reach out to as many voters as they can in what continues to be a tight race. Right now, former President Donald Trump in Georgia for a Fox News town hall on women's issues that will air tomorrow, followed by a rally tonight in Atlanta. Earlier, Trump sat down with Bloomberg News' editor at a forum at the Economic Club in Chicago.
We're going to bring the companies back. We're going to lower taxes still further for companies that are going to make their product in the USA. We're going to protect those companies with strong tariffs.
Vice President Kamala Harris joined radio host Charlamagne Tha God in Detroit today for a radio town hall event and met with local black entrepreneurs in the area. Harris might also do an interview on Joe Rogan's podcast, according to Reuters, as she looks to rake in more male votes. This offers opportunities and risks. Rogan has tens of millions of followers, but it's a less scripted environment with atypical interviews. And Trump says he also plans to go on the Joe Rogan podcast. This as a record number of voters have turned out for the first day of early voting in the critical battleground state of Georgia. A Georgia official says more than 250,000 people have voted today, far surpassing 2020's first day record of 136,000. And through it all, Harris is now facing plagiarism allegations from a book she wrote 15 years ago. National correspondent Christine Frizzell takes a look at the claims and the response from the Harris campaign.
Renewed attention on Kamala Harris's statements from the past, including from her 2009 book, Smart on Crime, A Career Prosecutor's Plan to Make Us Safer, which she co-wrote with author Joan O.C. Hamilton. Following research from an Austrian man, Dr. Stefan Weber, who calls himself a, quote, plagiarism hunter. Conservative activist Christopher Rufo posting side-by-side comparisons of passages without citations Harris allegedly lifted from sites like the Urban Institute, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and from this Wikipedia page, which turned out to be inaccurate.
I saw today, actually, a story that Kamala Harris apparently copied some significant chunks of her book from Wikipedia. So if you want a president with their own ideas, vote for Donald Trump. If you want a president who copies her own ideas from Wikipedia, vote for Kamala Harris.
The Harris campaign firing back in a statement, this is a book that's been out for 15 years, and the vice president clearly cited sources and statistics in footnotes and endnotes throughout. One plagiarism expert arguing while quotation marks should have been used, there does not appear to be intent to commit fraud.
The source itself was quoted, and oftentimes other passages were quoted, which gives an indication more of sloppy writing technique than sort of a deliberate attempt to plagiarize.
Harris certainly not the first to be accused of plagiarism. The allegations tanked Joe Biden's first presidential run in 1987, and former First Lady Melania Trump's 2016 convention speech directly lifted quotes from Michelle Obama's from 8 years prior.
That your word is your bond, that you do what you say you're going to do.
That your word is your bond, and you do what you say and keep your promise.
Now, as Donald Trump and Kamala Harris lay out their visions for the future, words from the past appear to be being dredged up for the final weeks of this campaign, Amira.
Yeah, and Christine, as we mentioned, 3 weeks out from this election, how big of a deal could this be for Harris?
You know, this is something that does have the potential for voters to raise their eyebrows at. But Harris is going on the interview circuit, and the bottom line here is she should have a good answer for how this happened and a good response if she is asked about this in any of these interviews.
All right, Christine Frizzau reporting for us from Washington, D.C. Thank you for that report. The Small Business Administration's disaster loan program out of money, so says President Joe Biden, as we learn that the initial insurance cost estimates for Florida following those back-to-back storms could exceed $55 billion. Florida state officials also looking at early estimates that are sure to climb.
With the Milton dollars that I just know off the top of my head, we have broken 100,000 claims. We're just cresting over about $1 billion in losses. It will grow.
The CFO's office also says there will be insurance villages in some of the hardest hit areas from both Milton and Helene. The villages will let policyholders meet with their insurance providers and work together to file claims. 17 days after Helene passed through North Carolina, reporting the exact numbers of who is still unaccounted for remains extra challenging. The National News Desk's Jennifer Emert explains why the state does not have an accurate count.
As the volunteers and rescue squads who mobilized in the days following Helene wind down, finding out who's still unaccounted for can be tough.
He loves it up there.
It's been 17 days since Katie Traina's family has heard from her brother Christopher.
He kind of bounces around the Asheville area, kind of just exploring the area.
Traina's family based in Florida was in touch with Chris days before the storm. He had a cell phone, but since the storm, nothing.
We just have to be hopeful and grateful that the time will come and that we'll find him.
They've shared his picture on social media and reported him missing to the United Way and Red Cross. They're grateful for local, state, and federal search efforts and thousands of volunteer hours from organizations like the Buncombe County Rescue Squad.
There were thousands of cases that the Register of Deeds worked, we had less than 200 that made the escalated list.
Escalated because of the conditions.
Those are the ones that, there was a landslide, so you couldn't access. The bridge was washed out, so you had to hike in.
The majority they were able to locate.
The majority of them were either well cared for because they were, number one, prepared. They might be, unaccounted for because they haven't been able to communicate with the outside world.
Those they couldn't reach remain on a list, now in the hands of the sheriff's office. That's where knowing how many still remain unaccounted for gets tricky. So many groups aided in the effort and have taken reports.
You've got the Asheville Police Department, you've got the Black Mountain Police Department, you've got the Sheriff's Department, you've got the State Bureau of Investigation. We had federal search and rescue, state search and rescue, local search and rescue.
Each had their own list, and until now, no one's tried to combine them or narrow it down.
We're getting to the point where we will have one list, but we're just not quite there yet.
That will take time, verifying each agency's list against the others and comparing them with the medical examiner's office. Time that seems like an eternity for families waiting for word.
Jennifer Emert reporting there. Nearly a year after an Army reservist shot and killed 8 people at a bowling alley and bar in Lewiston, Maine, survivors are taking legal action. Lawyers for 100 survivors and family members of victims plan to sue the Army and an Army hospital, claiming the Army knew 40-year-old Robert Card's mental health was declining and had failed to act. The Army has 6 months to respond to these claims. Migrant deaths have increased tenfold in the last 2 years near the southern border in New Mexico. 108 bodies of presumed migrants found there in the first 8 months of this year. That's according to New Mexico authorities. And that is a stark increase from the 9 that were found in 2020 and 10 found back in 2019. New Mexico's medical investigators office said heat-related deaths are the main cause. We've also learned that almost a third of the Border Patrol's primary surveillance cameras are not working right now, making it very difficult to stop illegal crossings. That's according to a new internal memo obtained by NBC News. A Customs and Border Protection spokesperson says they are working to install better technology. The Supreme Court sided with the First Amendment rights over the protection of law enforcement today. It's called qualified immunity, and the justices threw out an appellate court's decision opposing a lawsuit brought by a citizen journalist against Texas law enforcement. The journalist is challenging 2 felony counts of misuse of official information against her for writing about an officer who committed suicide and is seeking damages for her arrest. The justices also decided that Pennsylvania's gun restriction law prohibiting 18 to 20-year-olds from openly carrying firearms should remain in place for now. Today, the Supreme Court told the Third Circuit Court of Appeals to take a second look at the law after the lower court ruled it unconstitutional earlier this year. And new tonight, Boeing says they are raising up to $35 billion in liquidity to keep their credit ratings above junk status. The company is planning on selling roughly $25 billion in stock and debt offering, and is seeking a $10 billion credit loan to get through these tough times. Yesterday, Boeing estimated that they will lose roughly $5 billion a month as long as a machinist strike that began on September 13th goes on. Coming up, what we've learned about a counterattack Israel is planning as a response to Iran's missile strikes. Then a new warning about an expansion of the deadly Listeria outbreak tied to deli meats and the symptoms to look out for. Plus, what a Seattle business owner is calling for after his store was broken into this week for the 4th time. We're back in 90 seconds. Tonight, the Biden administration demanding the Israeli government act to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza within the next 30 days or risk violating U.S. laws governing foreign military assistance, suggesting U.S. military aid could be in jeopardy.
Humanitarian assistance has not been sustained. In fact, it has fallen by over 50% from where it was at its peak. So the Secretary, along with Secretary Austin, thought it was appropriate to make clear to the government of Israel that there are changes that they need to make again to see that the level of assistance making it into Gaza comes back up.
The United Nations says no food has entered northern Gaza since October 1st because it is being prevented by Israeli forces, putting 1 million people at risk of starving. Israel appearing to respond to this letter that was sent their way, posting a video on X showing 30 trucks entering northern Gaza today, or yesterday rather, adding that Israel is not preventing the entry of humanitarian aid. Over the last year, the U.S. has sent $17.9 billion to Israel, the most sent to the country in a single year. The humanitarian crisis deepens as Israel continues to vow a response to Iran's missile barrage. The counterattack will reportedly happen in the coming weeks, but probably not until after the U.S. election, so as to not interfere. The former head of Israel's defense intelligence weighing in on Israel's likely strategy.
I think by now, before the election, it is making sense to scale down the attack, but it should be calibrated to a level that Iran will think twice about their retaliation.
Israel has also indicated it has ruled out targeting Iran's nuclear and oil sites, instead focusing on its military targets. Trust in the media is at a record low. That's according to a new Gallup survey. As of this year, just 31% of Americans say they have a lot of trust in the mass media, down from 32%, which tied the record low in 2016. Those saying they don't have much trust has jumped to 33% from 27% in 2020. Before 2004, about half of the country said they trusted the media. The media is now the least trusted institution surveyed by Gallup. Germany's largest airline, Lufthansa, has been fined a record $4 million by the Department of Transportation for discriminating against Jewish passengers. According to the DOT, Lufthansa prohibited 128 Jews, most of whom wore distinctive garb typically worn by Orthodox Jewish men, from boarding a connecting flight from Frankfurt to Budapest after initially departing from New York. This happened back in May of 2022. The incident occurred after some passengers allegedly did not wear masks at a time when the airline was still requiring passengers to do so. Many of the 128 passengers who were denied boarding were not traveling together and did not know each other, yet all of them were asked not to fly, which violated their civil rights. Lufthansa says it is partnering with Jewish groups to create training programs for its employees. Walgreens is closing 1,200 locations, including 500 over just the next year. The closures represent a significant escalation from a few months ago. That's when the financially struggling drugstore chain announced it was shutting down 300 underperforming locations as part of a multi-year optimization program. The 1,200 closures announced Tuesday does include the 300 closures announced in June. We don't yet know which locations. And 2 weeks from Halloween, the holiday season is almost upon us, and financial experts are pleading with Americans who are now drowning in debt to be frugal with their holiday plans. The National News Desk's Janae Bowens has a closer look at the issue and tips on how to save money.
Millions of Americans are feeling the financial sting of mounting credit card debt.
Many Americans are overextended on the amount that they are borrowing.
It's no secret. Americans have a credit card problem. The latest numbers show Americans' credit card balance totaling $1.14 trillion. That's almost 6% more than last year.
Inflation, things being more expensive than they used to be. But the truth is this is also a cultural experience.
Financial therapist Nate Astle with Beyond Finance says there's a way out.
A big part of this is not continuing to add to the debt, changing some of the behaviors or habits that got you in debt in the first place is most important. And then figuring out how to pay down the debt is part two.
Now, getting out of debt requires a budget, setting up automatic savings, calling creditors to see if you can work out a deal, and possibly bringing in additional income so you can pay down debt little by little. When it comes to holiday spending,
I think it's something we should get more comfortable doing, is saying, hey, money's a little tight right now. And that I want to make sure that we still enjoy each other in other ways. One, it takes a lot of pressure off of you. Two, it actually might take pressure off of them.
It seems like people are taking Astle's advice. 1 in 3 holiday shoppers are shortening their wish list to spend less this year. That's according to a recent Bankrate survey. However, 27% of holiday shoppers plan to take on debt. I'm Janae Bowens reporting.
Janae, thank you. A major trade in the NFL. The Las Vegas Raiders have traded 3-time All-Pro wide receiver Davante Adams to the New York Jets. Adams is recovering from a hamstring injury, but says he is fine to play. Also making headlines for the Las Vegas Raiders, Tom Brady's minority ownership stake in the team has officially been approved by NFL owners. But the deal comes with restrictions for Brady, who also works for Fox Sports. Tom Brady will not be allowed access to other players or coaches in pregame meetings, and he won't be allowed to criticize officials or other teams on the broadcasts. He signed a 10-year deal with Fox Sports in 2022. The deadly Listeria outbreak that has already led to the recall of 10 million pounds of meat is now expanding to other potentially contaminated products. Medical reporter Liz Bonus shares what infectious disease specialists say we should do and we should know about this bacterial illness.
Hey there, everybody. This week, the USDA released a document that you can find online. It has more than 300 pages of specific retailers, brands, and food items containing the recalled meats due to Listeria. It does allow you to look up certain products by label, but with so many now on the list, Dr. Stephen Blatt of Ohio's TriHealth told me, here's perhaps the most important thing to know if you shop at any of these places where the foods on the list are sold.
Well, I think most people, even if they ate some of those products, are going to be fine, because if you're healthy, most people fend it off with no problem.
Dr. Blatt says we may be exposed to this bacteria more than we think, and it grows in cold temperatures, so cooking it may help.
Cooking the food generally does get rid of it, but if it's not fully cooked, like cold cuts and that sort of thing, then it can still cause illness.
You can treat Listeria effectively with penicillin, but you need a blood test to know if you have it. So he suggests you be on the lookout for these symptoms that sort of mimic the flu.
It can be a pretty nasty bacteria. It can cause lots of illness like high fevers and muscle aches and chills. And in the worst case, it can cause meningitis. It can affect the brain.
The most important thing, he says, is to know that if these symptoms continue to get worse instead of better, you need to tell your doctor. With your health news, I'm Liz Bonus reporting.
Liz, thank you. Coming up, why this year's presidential election is causing voters more stress and anxiety than usual. We'll be right back. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin in Seattle, where business owners are frustrated by repeated break-ins.
A break-in again and again and again. Since 2021, we've been reporting on these issues at Seal Barber and Spa in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood. Owner Matt Humphrey said this video shows the most recent burglary.
And they get out of here before the cops come. The cops did come about an hour later, which is too bad, and so we're out $13,000 in retail. And a new door, which is probably another $3,000.
After years of pleading, Matt says he hasn't seen a dent in these crimes.
I'd love to see our town improve after 4 years, but it's not. Let's change the laws so when you get prosecuted for petty crime, you actually do some time.
Both of our political parties and both of our sets of leaders speak of the election in terms of fear and in terms of dread. And if the other side wins, then that could be the end of America itself.
Mark Caleb Smith, director of the Center for Political Studies at Cedarville University, says this tactic may be leading to many Americans feeling intense pressure before voting in the upcoming election.
Well, the stakes are so much higher this time.
Kathy Jones of Dayton is one of those voters feeling that pressure. Experts at Premier Health see this too and say that it's a product of the highly charged political atmosphere. With this extreme messaging mainly being shared over social media, experts say that average people can easily be misinformed on either candidate, despite their best efforts for the opposite.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
The start of a 1.8 billion mile, 5.5-year journey. NASA's Europa Clipper took off Monday from the Kennedy Space Center. The probe is headed for its namesake, Jupiter's Europa moon, with hopes of finding an ocean underneath its icy exterior.
So Europa Clipper mission is going to go to Europa with state-of-the-art instrumentation to try and revisit places we have seen before with other spacecraft and get new data at much higher resolution, both exploring the surface and the subsurface to try and understand Europa better.
Coming up, what's next for the 2 new giant pandas that have finally arrived in Washington, D.C. from China? We'll be right back. Two new diplomats are officially in Washington, D.C. We're talking about the 2 cute, furry giant pandas that you see here that have finally arrived. They are on loan to the Smithsonian National Zoo for 10 years from China as part of the country's panda diplomacy, in which it sends pandas to live in various countries around the world as a form of goodwill. Over the summer, 2 pandas arrived to the San Diego Zoo, the first new pandas to enter the United States in 20 years. Now, as the pandas settle into their new home, their exhibit will be closed to the public, but will be open by January 24th of next year. And we're looking forward to that. That does it for this edition of the National News Desk. I'm Amira David, and thank you so much for watching.